Robbie's back. Robbie's back. Let's go. It's a bull
Feels
market.
good to be back.
Robbie, how you
It's
feeling,
a bull
man?
market. We're here.
How are you
I feel
feeling?
great.
Dude.
I'm a little tan, a little sunburned, but it feels good to be back.
Bull. Rob, welcome to the bull, man.
Yeah. Look, I came back to welcome you guys to the bull market. It feels good to be here.
Well, you're swimming.
I'm glad we're all here.
You're swimming in it. You're swimming in it.
Absolutely. I mean, how can you not? There's no complaints out here.
How's the?
There's no complaints. It's a bull market.
What's your read? You know, you've been doing a little traveling. You've been doing, working. What's your read on the market? You know, I've been checking the charts every 6-8 hours. Friends texting, people getting excited in Telegram. So my dopamine's obviously chalked. But what's your read from the outside? What are you seeing out there?
I think from the outside, they haven't even started the bull market yet. Wow. I think from the inside, it's like we're getting sillier and sillier by the minute. You know, we're seeing the risk curve play out. The secrets of crypto, Bitcoin, then Ethereum, then alt season is looming. We're seeing it circulating.
Dude, people said that wasn't going to happen. People were like, "Oh, it's not going to happen this way this time." But you know what's funny is that they were saying that because they were like, it's only institutional flows, so it's just going to be Bitcoin or ETH denominated. But what they didn't realize is that there was literally going to be digital asset treasury companies for altcoins.
I think also the 4-year cycle was somewhat chalked because we had a run up in Bitcoin like pretty early in the season. And people were like, oh, this is going to be kind of like a smaller, like more volatile, like sub cycles. But in reality, if you look at it, it's 2025. Bitcoin is at all-time highs. We're right on track for the same 4-year cycles that we've always had. And so there's really no reason to think that it wasn't going to happen. At least at this point going forward, it's not going to happen the same way that it always does. We're seeing ETH take a giant run up the last few weeks. Bitcoin obviously had the run up before that. I think the real test now is like, okay, if Bitcoin maybe has a little bit of a dip back to like the 110, maybe back down to like 100, will ETH stay where it is or even go up? And what will altcoins do as a result of that? When it comes, maybe it comes soon. Maybe it's not 110 down to 100. Maybe it's 150 back down to 125. Whenever we see a pretty substantial dip in the Bitcoin chart, that's when the real test is on to see if the rest of the ecosystem holds up.
Interesting. Yeah, man. I mean, look, I don't own much Bitcoin, but Coinbase coin stock all-time highs, brother. Boom. Boom.
Oh yeah.
How about Pengu?
Well, look,
dude, is that going to be the best?
We know you.
The best.
We know you're hyped about
Pengu of our entire fund. Are we going to return the fund on Pengu? Who would have thought, huh? The boys are cooking.
I mean, out of 50, 60 deals, it only takes one, right?
Dude.
And if it's Pengu, who's to say that it's not Pengu?
Luca's going to send that thing to new highs. That guy's an animal. So, all right, we got Arjun Bhatani, a good friend of the show, coming on, Rob. He put out a tweet today talking about digital asset treasury companies, ETH. They're seeing a ton of flows. We're going to celebrate some of the stuff that they're doing. We're going to get his take, what's going on in the rebalancing market, in the cross-chain market. I really just want to get his take from like this like core deep ethos perspective of like, kind of what he thinks about the kind of state of affairs today. So, there's a lot of these treasury companies happening. So we'll focus there and, see why he thinks this is leading to some flows for Everclear. We got John Adler coming up after talking about proof of governance. It's going to be fun too. Very interesting proposal and stuff that they're trying to do. We had Sriram on last week, asked him about economic security being a meme. I think that'll be an interesting pullback into the convo. And then the last one, we got Storm, who's going to unveil one of his new project, building a yield. I don't even know what it is, so we're going to find out something about yield on Solana. So we got quite the lineup today. We're going to get Arjun in here, Rob, and dude, you're fucking back, man. We're back.
It's a bull market. Feels good to be back. We are so back.
Yes, sir. Arjun's in the house. It's good to have him. And what's up, man?
Yo, how's it going? It's been a while.
It has.
It has been a while.
I think prices have gone up since we've last spoke.
Yeah, it's crazy. Entirely different part of the cycle. That means that I'm entirely different part of an entirely different human being.
It does feel that way. Yeah. Man, Arjun, I saw you guys flying under the radar. There was like a few weeks back a tweet that you guys had quietly crossed just about $1 billion. Maybe it's way more at this point.
Yeah, we crossed $1 billion like a week ago, and then now we're like at a $500 million monthly volumes. The next billion's gonna be pretty quick.
Damn. So yeah, you put out a tweet saying that like you think some of this is because ETH treasury company flows, institutional flows. We'll kind of get into some of the nitty gritty of exactly where this is coming from, but I just want to get your take, man. What is your take on this? On SBET, on Joe Lubin getting out there, Tom Lee getting out there with his company, being the face of Ethereum, right? Because you're a very ethos guy, like I think of you, I think of somebody who cares about the reasons why we're here, who cares about Ethereum, about the space. And we've got these figures going on these large media outlets and creating these vehicles to accumulate ETH. And now it's trickling all the way down. From the builder's perspective, from your perspective, being an OG, what's your take on SBET, on Joe Lubin, and on this entire kind of ETH treasury company?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think obviously there's a lot to it, right? I think overall super happy to see this, right? There's ETH institutional adoption has been a long time coming. We've been saying it literally for 10 years, or oh, the institutions are coming, the institutions are coming now. That's actually happening. So I think everyone has been so far got rugged so many times by that statement that eventually people stop believing in it, and then or at least we're no, this time is not going to be the time, and then this time is actually the time where it's happening, which is crazy. And so when you're looking at these treasuries and you're seeing oh, well, the people that are participating in it are Goldman Sachs and shit like that, you're okay, wow, yeah, actually this is real. Now of course there's two sides of it, right? Obviously it's good that we are finding vehicles to give exposure to these players that just didn't exist before. I think the other side of it is, of course, this is certainly going to bring a lot of the like crypto degeneracy has like crossed the chasm, right? And like we crossed the chasm in terms of like the ultimate degeneracy of meme coins with like Trump and stuff like that. Now we're starting to cross the chasm in terms of what is in for many organizations that are doing this for treasuries, especially for some of the other longer tail locked up assets, is like basically just ohm. And so you're kind of, we're kind of like recreating some of the things that have already been done in this space before, and that we know don't work, but non-crypto retail doesn't really know it doesn't work. And I think those lessons will, unfortunately, at least some of them will end up needing to be relearned. For ETH, it's obviously less bad, right? ETH is like a AAA blue chip asset, and so you're not going to have as much of the kind of crazy shit with it. But I do think that there is we'll have to see what happens. Like normie retail and normie institutions are going to bid the shit out of these like treasury things, and like that is going to, they're going to get wrecked like at some point. And like it's not going to be because of anything else. Like even if we try to tell them not to do that, like they're going to get wrecked because the market just has to learn that lesson. And I don't really know how to stop that from happening, right? It's the same thing as like all of crypto in like the early, like pre 2020, knowing that algo stables isn't going to work, and then Terra coming along and then like really showing everyone that algo stables isn't going to work.
I still have faith in algo stables, but I don't think I'm not sure that we've actually seen it work. So maybe I'm just on a false hope here. But one thing that I did see, Arjun, that it does not apply to ETH necessarily, but is important that you shed light on, is that there are actually some of these, and they're calling them DATs, digital asset treasuries, or digital asset treasury companies, DATs. There's some there are actually some VCs which are able to actually provide locked tokens as their contribution into this company, effectively then shortening whatever their vesting period would be, which is typically, multi-year, to whatever the maturity is on this kind of deal, let's just call it. There's some like, nooks and crannies into exactly how it works, but effectively I saw a tweet from CMS Holdings say that I thought was really good, which was that if you're the retail investor getting allocation in these and putting up capital, but VCs are just putting up locked tokens, then you're the one who's kind of getting the short end of the stick.
Basically getting dumped on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is like great. It's like strategic for the VCs who want to like, take advantage of it. But like, of course, they're going to be the bad guy again. But I don't think ETH has that problem though. So
yeah, ETH doesn't have that problem for sure. And that's actually the really like the negative. So obviously there's going to be like shitty things that come out of the ETH treasury stuff. That's mostly just going to be like retail hype, right? Retail like bidding this out of proportion of like what the underlying NAV is. But at the end of the day, like it's not like ETH the asset is being manipulated. It's not like ETH the asset is anything other than this like very, very awesome, incredibly neutral store of value and public good, right? I think you rightly pointed out, it's really like these treasury companies for like some of these other assets where like there are locked tokens where there are actually real risks. And like the sad reality is like this stuff has also been done before in TradFi. Like TradFi has found ways to rug retail for generations and like basically by preying on exactly this, which is like retail not truly understanding like time value of money, not truly understanding like, oh, how does like who is actually the bag holder in these situations, like how does this thing work? And I do fear like, a lot of basically what has happened recently within the space of VCs having like lockups and like, bidding up token valuations, launching tokens at super high prices for things that don't really end up getting traction, or it's just like an unrealistic price, and then getting liquidity by like selling OTC or finding ways out of those lockups, and then retail getting dumped on. Like I do fear that in some ways the like longer tail treasury companies is basically an attempt, now that it's stopped working on crypto retail, it's an attempt to now shift it over to like TradFi retail, right? It's like basically who is the next buyer? Who is going to be the next person that's like not going to know that this scheme and going to be the buyer? That is the concern. I think like, again, I think this is one of those things where like there's not, unfortunately, like we need to try to like, educate people and be like, hey, look, these are the risks. Like, this is what you need to think about. These are the things you should look out for as part of investing. But there will, unfortunately, just because there is hype, the reality is there will be some people that will just not look at that and they will get wrecked. And I think this is one of those situations where like the market the invisible hand of the market will bitch slap some people, and then we will learn collectively, right? Unfortunately.
And Arjun, would you say that there's kind of like there's one treasury company style and you know the digital asset treasuries are kind of one and the same, they all sort of operate in the same way, or is there some of them that do things better than the others, and there's actually a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this? Too many of them are too predatory and doing things the wrong way. Like if you were building one of these from scratch, right, and you were putting it together and trying to do it the right way, how would you build one of these digital asset treasury companies the right way?
That's a really good question. I will say in general, like, I think it's pretty early. I'm also fairly new to this, as is everyone. Like, we're all still trying to figure this out, right? I think like we just don't know yet what the playbooks are, and like people who are very, very good financially are the ones that are kind of able to navigate this, like in like just, and I don't just mean that within crypto. I mean like understanding the regulations outside of this space and understanding like what kinds of like legal structures are able to be used to actually make all of this work, right? I think those people have like an advantage here. I do think like if I was trying to do it from scratch, from first principles, right? Like the goal here is try to find a way to give exposure to retail of like your asset and do this using like a public vehicle, right? And of course, like getting people to buy into a public vehicle and then go using those funds to buy spot or buy like tokens of an asset makes a lot of sense as a way to do that. And it's basically just like an SPV, right? The ways to do it correctly are to have one, like very, very strong reporting and clear understanding around like what are the assets underneath. Those assets do need to be liquid. Like it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be like buying lockups. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. You shouldn't be engaging in like transactions directly with insiders. Ideally, like you should be buying like market makers or spot and like buying over a longer period. And then I think like, yeah, I think it's basically about like finding the right ways to have like responsibility to shareholders, right? Like technically, if you're a public company, you have a fiduciary obligation to your shareholders. Unfortunately, a lot of public companies, also similar to crypto companies, don't really seem to care about that, but like that is technically true, right? And so I think you have to sort of maintain that fiduciary obligation by like making it very clear to them, like, hey, like this is not a risk-free vehicle, right? If you're investing in this thing and it's trading at a premium, maybe it's worthwhile to have that premium, but if it's beyond a certain point, like that doesn't necessarily make sense. You have to sort of like ideally like release information about like what the financials of this thing look like and what price actually makes sense.
Yeah, man. I mean, that is like, so I don't know if there's any like right way to necessarily do this from the lens of actually trying to, you know, I think it's just an education thing. I think you're right. So with that being said, I'd like to shift over to Everclear and to some of the work that you guys have been doing. So we got a little confetti for you today and a little money rain going on because you guys have crossed $1 billion. Congratulations, pushing on 2. We're gonna do some money rain and some confetti. How does this tie in? So where does the ETH institutional appeal tie into Everclear's clearing product for cross-chain transactions? How have you seen flows kind of come, or like, you wrote that tweet today, like what is the thesis behind you think the increase in volume is because of this institutional appeal for ETH?
Yeah. Yeah, so just taking a step back, right? So, and Andy, you and I've talked about this. I mean, since like the Everclear launch, right, back in last year in like in Singapore at Token, the kind of Everclear thesis is, at the end of the day, there is fragmentation is going to exist, right? Like interop is just too complex of a problem because there's just too many moving pieces. There's so many different kinds of chains with different kind of security properties. You can't create one single unifying system that will work everywhere. It will always have trade-offs. This exists in TradFi as well, right? TradFi is made up of a bunch of different systems, a bunch of different kinds of banks, a bunch of different protocols. And the way that this is solved in TradFi is clearance, which means that you have some entity in between that is responsible for like basically processing all of the transactions going in different directions, batching them and netting them down. So you're only settling the final delta between chains or between banks or whatever, right? So a good example here is like Visa. When you when you go and you pay with a credit card with Visa, a payment is not immediately completed at the point, like when you go and buy a coffee, right? Visa makes a promise to the merchant, to whoever you're buying coffee from, that like this payment will be completed. And what they do is they take all of the payments that are happening around the world during a day or a half day or whatever period, and they like net them off against one another, which means if there's like $1 million going from Bank of America to Chase and then 500K going from Chase to Bank of America, they just turn that into 500K going from Bank of America to Chase, right? The same kind of thing exists in crypto across chains. Like when you look at all the flows that are going between chains, there's a lot of things that are just canceling each other out all the time. And like, this is especially true in this world that we live in today with intents, and intents obviously being now like the dominant, basically the only form of bridging that exists, right? Like even Stargate is launching an intent protocol. Like every single major bridge is now an intent protocol, which is crazy. Hyper intentification has happened. And for all of these intent bridges, you have solvers, these backend liquidity providers that are like the institutions, right? They are the businesses that are going and giving you money, that are making the transaction happen immediately. And then they are taking on the overhead of dealing with cross-chain. Now these solvers, the interesting thing about them is they don't care as much about time. As a user, when you're bridging or you're doing something across chains, you want that to happen immediately, right? In seconds, ideally less. But a solver, like they're a business, they're making this, they're facilitating this for you, but behind the scenes, like they're okay if it takes like 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever for them to get their money back and for them to figure things out. And what we found is like similar again to like TradFi, right? These institutional players, they have larger amounts of capital, they have larger flows, they want to send these flows across chains. What they care about is doing that in the most efficient way possible. This is especially true for ETH, because when you talk about stables and things like that, you, to an extent, right, CCTP, you can mint and burn the asset across chains. Other stables you can mint and burn to an extent, right? It doesn't work everywhere, but it does improve things. But ETH doesn't have that. If you want to get ETH from one chain to another, you have to go through like 7 days of exit window pain. There's no other option, right? You have to go through Ethereum. That is insane. Like that is just like a non-starter for everyone. So ETH today for Everclear is like by far our largest source of volume. And it just has been, because like there's literally no other option on the table, right? There's no other way to make this stuff work. And so instead of users sending ETH between chains through canonical bridges, they just put it into Everclear. All of these solvers put their flows into Everclear, and these flows go in different directions. They cancel each other out, right? As ETH institutional volume has taken off, that has led to just this cascading effect, right? As institutional volume takes off, prices go up. More people start arbitraging between chains. Institutional players start moving larger amounts of capital between chains. Market makers start rebalancing more between chains. That trickles to the intent solvers who start rebalancing more between chains. What we have seen is in the last, like, let's say 10 days or so since this has taken off, there's a pretty clear chart. Like you can go to like Everclear, like explorer.everclear.org right now. You can go to our analytics page and you could just look at the daily volume chart and you'll see this like stepwise growth. As soon as ETH, like that correlates exactly with ETH taking off, right? And it's entirely ETH volume. And it's coming from the fact that there is just no other way to do this. Like we explicitly built Everclear as a solution to the exact problem that exists today, which is awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just, further confirming that the kind of the shift that you guys made was this very specific problem solving kind of shift that took guts to basically be able to do that. But it kind of, I mean, is there anybody else in the market who's doing rebalancing?
So basically,
I mean, like, maybe
most other rebalancing, there's no DeFi protocol. There's no decentralized approach to rebalancing.
That's what I thought. It's just centralized exchanges.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like there are other people that have kind of thought about it or have slightly worked on it. Nobody's been able to get the traction because it's such a network effects oriented thing. And now we have gotten the flywheel going. People are starting to realize like, yeah, there's actually something here, which is awesome. This market has kind of like grown underneath us, which is something that we really predicted. And the sexes as well are starting to run into the same issues where it's like sexes are not like, they're not, magical. Like they also need to rebalance capital. It's just that right now they just eat all of those costs internally, but they pay those costs internally. And like they pay those costs in terms of keeping large amounts of deposits on every chain that they just don't do anything with, right? They're just sitting there, and they do this in order to have available liquidity. But like that is all lost opportunity, lost capital, right? Like it's just sitting there. And so like, yeah, even for these sexes, like we're kind of starting to see, like talking to a bunch of sexes, we're starting to see them being like, yeah, you know what? Like it would be so much easier. We'd be able to get so many more chains. We'd be able to have such better pricing. We'd be able to have we'd be able to make so much more money if we just like actively managed our capital through Everclear and effectively shared it with other exchanges. And you know, we're playing the same playbook that we've played with the solvers and bridges, which is like you start with kind of like the smaller ones that are like, well, yeah, like I don't have enough liquidity to really like definitively be like, you know what, I've already solved this problem. I'm going to work with other people on it. And then as it gets larger and the snowball kind of starts turning, like you eventually get to the bigger players who are like, yeah, I just have to join the system. Like there's no other option. This just makes so much sense now.
What do you think you get to by like end of the year in terms of like weekly volume?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What's like your goal?
So right now we're growing. We have since January averaged about 50% growth every month. So we're basically doubling in size every 2 months, which is awesome.
Wow. You get the money emoji. You get the money falling down on your face.
Yeah. So in January we did 4 months of 4 million in volume. Obviously we were just getting started, and there's such a huge chicken and egg problem around this, right? Like just like creating a system with network effects, getting the flywheel going is just so much pain. It was like maximum pain for several months. But this month is we're certainly going to clear half a billion. Sorry. I think we're actually intentionally trying to avoid things like growing in too fast, because we're like, okay, look, like, you know, you guys have all seen like there's so many stories out there of protocols that just like overnight just explode. And while that's awesome, I think like they're also not very long lived, right? You do have to like sort of make sure that it's sustainable and stuff like that. So right now what we're trying to do is make sure like, hey, we just keep driving costs down, Like our cost basis has basically continuously been dropping, right? And so we want to try to keep up that trajectory, like 50% a month. And so that means in a couple of months we want to try to get to 1 billion. End of the year, hopefully it's like 2 to 4 billion monthly. So maybe 1 billion a week, you know.
And Arjun, you mentioned how important ETH is as an asset because there's a lot of flow for this asset in particular. And there was someone else, I think it was Rasheen from Twine, who mentioned this is basically all just asset issuers and bridges. And that really seems like it is what's going on here, because ETH as an asset is happening, but it doesn't really have a robust bridge ecosystem. There's obviously a lot of bridges, but none of them are really netting, or an issuer, exactly. Whereas you mentioned CCTP and Circle, they're able to kind of net flows of USDC with, you know, one another that are trading. How are you thinking about extending, you know, given this kind of projection of volume, how are you thinking about extending the solution to other assets? Do you think there's enough, and it's really just kind of like, okay, as ETH grows, you guys will grow in volume too? Or are you thinking about other assets and how you're going to facilitate and support asset issuers with, you know, a bridge ecosystem as they get to be more widely used as payments?
Yeah, this is a really, really important question, right? Because this is basically like the gotcha that we always get from a lot of people. We're like, oh, well, like, you know, they're like, oh, well, for any asset that is issued, like, you know, we could just work with the asset issuer directly and they could just do it custodially. And that's true, they can. And that kind of like, not everybody wants to have a custodial asset, but like most of the non-custodial assets are like governance tokens, right? What are the assets that have velocity? It's basically ETH, to a lesser extent Bitcoin, and then like stables. And with the stables, all of them are like just custodial. So like no one cares about them being more custodial. However, and I think that there's something really interesting here. The kind of flip side of this gotcha is there are a ton of stables, and they effectively play the same function in the market, right? They're not like, as a user, you know, as a stable issuer, like, yeah, there's a difference between pay USD and USDC and USDT and, you know, USD whatever, right? But as a user, you don't care. It's just dollars. And the interesting thing, the really interesting thing, is that technically speaking, when you have a whole ecosystem of stables, and you want to enable very, very seamless interactions between an entire ecosystem of stables that are being used for payments and investments, things like that, effectively, you can model that as a single stable that is governed by a consortium, right? It's a single stable governed by a consortium of extremely competitive actors. So effectively, it is a decentralized stable in the sense that, like, modulo some like capital controls and things like that from functionally from a like, how do you do bridging for this broader ecosystem perspective? It does kind of look the same. The answer for us to your question is, one, we already support a bunch of stables, and like we do have a decent amount of volume through them. And that especially happens in places where like things like CCTP are not supported, right? But two, we think the real value for stables is in cross-asset settlement, cross-stable settlement, because no one gives a shit about getting pay USD versus USDC, right? No user cares about that. No merchant cares about that. What they do care about is making sure that they actually get paid and they don't have to go and convert themselves, because that is the worst experience. And so we think intent solvers are going to become stable variant agnostic, because who gives a shit? But if the intent solvers become stable variant agnostic, they need a way to rebalance across assets on the back end. And there is no way to do that except for us, basically. Like, this is another instance where this is also just clearance.
I'm sure you saw a similar situation when it came to, okay, we have wrapped ETH on this chain, wrapped ETH on that chain. We have wrapped staked ETH over here. And it was almost this Cambrian explosion of just different variants of the same asset, which is effectively what's going on here. We have dollars. All stable coins are effectively different variants of those dollars. We're going to get a bigger Cambrian explosion of several more types of stable coins. Genius Act passed last week. We're going to get so many more stable coins. Every bank is going to have one. And so are there lessons that we can learn from the wrapped ETH on, 50 different types of bridged wrapped ETH on different chains? Is there any lessons that we can learn from that era and apply those to clearing different stable coins?
Yeah. So first off, I think the many different flavors of wrapped ETH. So first off, like the many different flavors of wrapped ETH on each chain thing, like still exists. It is still a problem. In fact, we are talking to players right now to pilot this like cross-asset settlement thing specifically around wrapped ETH, because we see the value for it. We already have a ton of ETH liquidity. It's very easy for us to support it. And like, it's basically just like a small config change for us, but we can all of a sudden support this like incredible use case, right? So we're already talking to a bunch of players about exactly this because it's just there. I would say like, this is just a problem, right? There are going to be many flavors of each asset. I think like, in the same way that in the past, like when DeFi first started, like back in 2017, 2018, when we were first talking about this, right? Most people's mental model was like, there's going to be basically one DEX protocol, and there's going to be basically one lending protocol. In the same way that there's one, TCP/IP, and there's one HTTP, and like the protocol is going to be so open, and incredibly neutral that it's like, why not just use it, right? Obviously, that hasn't happened, and we eventually learned to like not only accept but come to love the fact that there's just this like plurality of protocols and chains and heterogeneity, and that gives this space quite a bit of anti-fragility, if albeit makes it extremely chaotic. I think the same thing is going to happen with assets, and in fact I kind of welcome that. Like for a long time I was like, no, there should really just be like one standard for things, and now I'm like, you know what, this space is so competitive. There's not going to be one standard for things. There's not going to be one way to do things. This is a huge market. It's the entire world we're talking about. And a world where anyone can actually issue their own asset is actually kind of better, because the fragmentation to an extent provides anti-fragility, right? Like you don't have one asset collapsing doesn't just take out the entire economy like in 2008. You have this plurality where there's just a bunch of different people with deposits everywhere. Now, of course, there is still the underlying kind of root of trust, which is the U.S. government. That's why ETH, in the long term. But I do think that there's something to be said about like embrace the fact that there's going to be many stable coins, and lean into the fact that things like Everclear and eventually other clearing protocols, right? I don't know if you guys have seen, but there are other people that have launched protocols for clearance. They're targeting slightly different markets, but it is starting to happen. And this is just like TradFi players that are coming in being like, yeah, we should build a clearinghouse on a blockchain. I think those people will lean into the same thing.
Interesting. Well, Arjun, man, it's been a pleasure to catch up. Thank you for joining us last minute notice here. And again, congrats on the on the growth. We're gonna send you off with some confetti here for your 1 billion, 2 billion soon, hopefully 10 billion at the end of the year, if you guys allow yourselves to grow that fast, sir. That's how we do it. Huh?
Appreciate it, Andy.
We can't scale too fast.
You can't. You seriously can't.
All right, Arjun. Thank you, man. See you soon.
Thanks,
Okay,
Arjun.
y'all. Yeah.
Alrighty, guys. Love that guy. I mean, he's well-spoken and a smart dude.
One of the nicest guys in crypto.
Yeah.
Honestly, he's just.
Yeah.
I think he's been around for so long and really pioneered some of these concepts around intents, but failed to find product market fit until now. And look how fast they're growing.
Yeah. A little camera debug there. So I have to fix that here during the next guest. But we got John Adler coming up, the Giga Brain from Celestia, talking about governance, talking about inflation, talking about the recent proposal for the endgame for LSTs. We'll get him up here in a second. And yeah, Rob, how you feeling, man? First interview back on the stream.
Feels good. I'm bullish on what Arjun's doing. We're gonna get into Celestia and John Adler and all of the GigaBrain stuff happening over there here pretty soon. But I really feel like they've cracked something this time. The whole team's cracked over there.
Everclear? Yeah, man. I mean, the growth is clear. Like it's clear growth.
And we're seeing payments really come into the limelight as a true use case for crypto and blockchain rails, not just stable coins, but payments. Like it's the same reason Stripe, like the biggest payment company around, is they're acquiring so many blockchain companies so that they can offer these services. With as much, I mean, we talked about it before. I think Stripe supports something like 50% of the Fortune 500. They're doing trillions of dollars in volume. They're going to face this problem with so many stable coin variants, right? Maybe they can support them over the bridge, but when it comes to netting out these different stable coin variants against the dollar, they're going to need a way to support that on and off ramp process. And I think Everclear is in a pretty good position to partner with a major fintech payments provider like a Stripe to help provide some of that clearing value.
It's pretty crazy how like all of this open source software is now going to be adopted by some of the largest players in the world. Like we've just built the rails for this alternative financial system, and then boom, we already have Aave being used by large institutions, big players. Just it's funny how all the power comes back to the open source developers and those who have like created this. It's like transparent code, and then effectively there's just unlimited building possibilities on top. So yeah, shout out.
It goes to show it's a true meritocracy, right? And the widest open market is the one that'll produce and innovate the quickest and therefore win.
Yeah, man. All right, we've got John ready in the back. We're gonna get him up. We're gonna talk about the proof of governance proposal, his endgame vision, and more. So John, welcome to the show, man. Good to have you back.
Thank you for having me again.
Good to see you.
Welcome.
You definitely ruffled the feathers. Yeah, you've definitely been ruffling some feathers in the proof of stake camp. Maybe just quick rewind. A month ago, you're somewhere writing up this proposal, thinking about the dynamic of proof of stake. As Zucky says, some of these ideas came from a hot tub from the Cosmos space. You're writing this proposal around proof of governance being the end game for LSTs. What's going on in your mind? What kind of caused this thought? What series of thoughts led to you starting this idea? And then we're going to dive into some of the more technical stuff and go through it.
Yeah, so to kind of first of all, I enjoyed watching your podcasts with various guests. I believe it was at Permissionless around the time that you were talking, around the time that you mentioned a bunch of people were talking about proof of governance or reducing staking issuance. That staking issuance is not yield, is not real yield. It's just a tax, things like that. I feel like very few people cited what inspired them to start talking about this narrative at that exact time. But I'm a bit biased, but I like to think that it was my post that kind of catalyzed all that.
You didn't get the credit that you deserve, but nevertheless, it did proliferate the zeitgeist.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm used to it by now. So what's the thinking behind this? So it started with the thought of, we have Celestia as a blockchain, we have TIA. We would like TIA to be used in DeFi and all the things like that. And whenever you have a proof of stake token and you have a DeFi that is using that token, you end up in a situation where staking derivatives and LSTs and that kind of stuff might interfere with the yield in DeFi. Oh, sorry. Let me take that back. It's not that the staking derivatives interfere with the yield, but rather the staking yield interferes with the DeFi yield. And the way to counteract that is by the existence of staking derivatives like LSTs. And this is what kind of 𝘬𝘂𝘂 and his co-authors and co-conspirators kind of posited back in the day of when ETH2 was starting. 𝘬𝘂𝘂 and his co-authors basically said, that regardless of what you do on the primary chain, you're going to have staking derivatives, you're going to have LSTs, even if there's no in-protocol delegation. And therefore, it's kind of a losing battle to not have in-protocol delegation. Might as well embrace it. This turned out to be true, much to the dismay of the Ethereum consensus designers and implementers. Lido and a bunch of other LSTs ended up existing on Ethereum, and today, they control the majority, if not the super majority, of control. Control is a strong word. Don't read too much into that. They control the majority of stake on voting power on Ethereum. That's not a bad thing. Just kind of the natural consequence of staking yield kind of will compete with DeFi yield. And if you have a staking derivative, you can get both at the same time. Okay, no los dos. You can get your staking yield through a yield-bearing staking derivative, like staked ETH, as it were, or staked TIA if it exists on Celestia. And you can get the yield from DeFi, lending, gambling, speculating, whatever the heck you want to do. So we're now in a situation where we have, that's kind of the background context of how we got to, how this applies to Celestia. We have Celestia. We would like LSTs for Celestia. If TIA is going to be used in DeFi, we would like LSTs for TIA. While doing background literature review on the subject, I was told about John Charbonneau's post on proof of governance. Well, I was told about it. I guess I had known about it way back when it was first originally posted, and he did the presentation on this topic way back when. But I had kind of like memory hold it for a while because LSTs hadn't come up for a while. So I was presented with this. I read it, and I'm like, oh, this kind of makes sense. For what it's worth, I should say that while I wrote the post on the proof of governance proposal, it was primarily driven internally by Nashku, our head of research at Celestia Labs, who was driving our internal LST design efforts. I just kind of published it. As one does, just publish research posts / blog posts to get ideas out there. But most of the effort was driven and kind of this notion of proof of governance and filling in some of the missing details in John Charbonneau's post was primarily driven by our head of research, Nashku, just to give credit where credit is due. So what does John Charbonneau argue? He basically argues that in a sufficiently mature LST landscape, you end up with a way of selecting validators that isn't the same way that you do in kind of a naive, immature proof of stake way. It's not just I have some stake and then I delegate to a particular validator and then that's it. Right? It's going to be something a little more, let's say, intermediated. For example, let's consider kind of a spherical cow model where you have one single liquid staking operator. Let's say you had just Lido, and just Lido had 100% of staking with it. This makes sense because why would you leave yield on the table if you can liquid stake and also get DeFi yield and also do like looping and stuff? Like why would you leave yield on the table? That's kind of, you would not in any sufficiently mature system with little friction. And we should work to remove the frictions. Any sufficiently mature system, you would collect all the yield that you can collect. You wouldn't leave free money on the table. So okay, you have 100% of stake to a single liquid staking operator. So this does a few things. The first thing is the validators that this operator selects to actually be the validators of the system. That's how validators are selected, not through delegations to individual validators. So this is a type of governance thing where you can say like you kind of put your stake into this, 𝘠𝘬𝘁 as an example, and then 𝘠𝘬 is the one that actually selects the validators in this example.
Right.
Another thing this does is that if 100% of tokens are staked, which again, if you have this mature system where people don't leave yield on the table, then 100, close or either 100 or close to 100 would be staked. Staking issuance is actually 0, the net issuance. The reason is that, let's suppose that you have Ethereum. It has some issuance. I forget what it was. Let's say it's 2% a year, right? They issue 2% of the ETH supply a year. This is just an example. I don't know the exact numbers. If 100% of ETH is staked, that issuance just goes back to the ETH holders. In other words, it's not actually a real issuance because everyone gets more ETH, but ETH also gets diluted by 2%. So the yield is 2%, the inflation is 2%, it cancels out, and the real yield is 0. And this is why you have various people, including like Anatoly on Twitter, is very vocal about this point, but never kind of took the leap of faith of proposing actually making a change based on this point. But he keeps talking that proof of stake issuance is not real issue. It's not real yield. It's just a tax because you get yield, like fake yield, but then you get taxed, and then you have to pay taxes on this fake yield. It's kind of a giant scam, like capital gains tax. Exactly. It's just a tax. If you're in a jurisdiction that the taxes you, then you pay taxes, and that's where the money goes. It just goes out of the system. No one's getting anything. So if you're in the situation in this spherical cow model, 100% of tokens are staked. Real issuance is actually 0. So if real issuance is 0, it's arguable why would anyone stake? And also you have this LST operator that essentially decides the validator set. Can you just kind of get to this end system, but make it even better than that? And that's kind of where proof of governance comes in, which is we say, okay, well, let's skip over all the staking stuff, because if you have 100% staked and you don't actually get any yield, so why would anyone stake? Let's just skip over all this. Let's just do the validator selection part. And the reason this is fine is that validators aren't meant to secure the system, and they aren't meant to define what is valid. Validators are cucks. A common, this in different words is a common refrain in the Ethereum crowd when they compare and contrast how Bitcoin miners aren't supposed to control the system, right? And Ethereum miners back in the day when Ethereum is proof of work don't control Bitcoin and Ethereum. They might build additional blocks on top of the previous longest chain, but they don't define what Bitcoin and Ethereum blocks are valid. They don't define hard forks, et cetera, et cetera. All of this is done through social consensus, through deploying hard forks, getting communities and exchanges and users and developers and everyone to coordinate around upgrades, et cetera, is not done through miners or, in the case of proof of stake, validators deciding on the governance of the chain. The validators and miners are effectively are downstream of governance, not upstream of governance. So therefore, if you imagine a very simple and naive system, I'm not saying this is how proof of governance should be done, but you could imagine a very simple and naive system where you have in the software, you have a list of validators. And then those are your validators. No staking, no delegation, no nothing. Those are your validators. And then if any validator decides to misbehave, well, then you can penalize them in some way, exercise less for the reader, and then change them in the node software through a hard fork. Blockchain communities coordinate through hard forks anyways, and then the selection of the validator is automated through the node software as by hard coding them. So again, this is like a very naive, like minimally viable proof of governance implementation way you would do it. Potentially something in production would be more sophisticated than this, but that's just an example to get the listeners kind of a mental model of how it could work. And in this way, you now no longer need staking. You no longer need staking issuance. Therefore, you can cut issuance. And you can do various other things that make the token more, the tokenomics and the kind of value thesis of the token more obvious and more concrete and less confusing because of the existence of issuance as a fake yield. For example, what I propose in my what I propose well, I shouldn't say what 𝘱𝑒 proposed that I then transcluded in my post on proof of governance is you can burn all transaction fees. Currently, in a lot of chains, transaction fees go to the validator that created the block. Cosmos chains, including 𝘗𝘂𝘂, do it a bit differently, which is always weird, but they distributed it to all validators. But you can do even better, which is in the model where 100%, sorry, not all validators, they distribute it to all stake. So in the model where 100% of tokens are staked, well, then if you're going to distribute it to all stake, that's the same thing as just burning it. So instead of like from an accounting perspective, it's easier to burn it than distribute it to everyone because it's like a single state change to just burn a token as it's paid for fees versus if you had like to distribute a small amount of dust to everyone would be substantially more expensive from a state, like from a programming and state transition point of view. So you just burn the fees. So this makes now the value accrual thesis of the token much more obvious, which is that it's just directly and only and concretely the DCF really. It's how many fees do you expect the blockchain to have in the future? That's how much is going to burn, and therefore that's how much value is going to be driven to the token. You don't have to worry about the complexities of the fake issuance, the real issuance being fake yield, and things like that. So this system is substantially simpler than proof of stake systems. It allows you to reduce issuance substantially because now you essentially decouple the issuance you have to pay to validators, because even though validators are cucks, they do create blocks. That is a real cost to them, right?
Yeah.
And they need to be paid for this cost. So now instead of having this weird thing where you couple validator commission, which is some variable, with voting power, and they may have variable voting power, therefore they may have varying commissions, but their fixed costs for each validator is really the same. Like, why? Like if you have 10% voting power versus 0.1% voting power, you still have to run the same full node to be a validator. So you have like all these weird things going on because you've coupled these things in proof of stake that don't need to be coupled. So okay, you just decouple them, and then the protocol can just pay validators what they need to be paid to be slightly, potentially very profitable, whatever the social consensus of the chain decides, to be profitable in running their validator operations. And you can do so uniformly among all validators because you just know what that number is and you just pay them. And therefore you don't have, it's much simpler in how validators are paid, which is actually a nice thing. Now you might say, okay, well, what's the point of doing this? The reason it's nice is that currently you have this awkward situation where validators that are larger have economies of scale. This applies to both Cosmos chains and to Ethereum. For example, Ethereum says you need to run one validator node per validator, right? It turns out, and you can run like one beacon node for many validators, but you need one validator node that does some sort of amount of work per validator. And that work is verifying some subset and attesting to some subset, right? The problem is that it turns out beyond some threshold, which is I think like a few thousand validators, it turns out you don't actually need to run additional validator nodes. You can just spin up additional keys. In other words, at a certain point, you just get economies of scale where you can spin up, let's say 1 million validators, well, maybe not that many, whatever, a large number of validators without incurring any additional physical costs to running nodes. So there are economies of scale there. The same applies to economies of scale in Cosmos style, Tendermint style chains, which is that the more voting power a validator has, the lower commission it can charge while still being more profitable, while a very small validator needs to charge a higher commission to stay profitable. Proof of governance lets us do this very nice thing where all validators in the chain all effectively have the same voting power. So it's all uniform, which means exactly, that everyone has the same costs and they have the same voting power in the consensus protocol, and therefore they can get the same rewards. Everything is completely uniform. And that makes a lot of things much easier when determining the economics of how much validators should be getting paid. There's also some further down things that I won't talk about. Like if you know that all the validators have equal voting power, it makes it easier to round robin and do some other things between them because that there's uniformity. Various things to do with gossiping, transaction and block propagation that I won't get into because it's too low level. But let's just say there's a huge number of secondary benefits to having these validators have uniform voting power. So anyways, that's kind of the TLDR, that there's a huge number of benefits, and it hugely simplifies how these consensus protocols work by changing the Sybil resistance mechanism from this delegated staking to governance directly. Because ultimately, even if you do delegated staking, or staking with staking derivatives, which is still delegated staking just with extra steps, you still end up in a situation where you have some sort of governance deciding on the validators, just again with more steps. So might as well skip the steps and do it directly. Hopefully you weren't muted for that entire dialogue, because it was actually a pretty good summary.
Yeah, sure. So I think Andy was hitting on
Just need to unmute. LOL.
some good points there.
Sorry,
I think we got it
guys.
figured out. So
All right,
go ahead.
Quick recap. Okay, we don't want a very centralized staking provider. Lido, 100% exchanges, etc. Two, the entire idea of like, okay, we have all of this yield, but if the price of these different assets that we're staking is variable, you have to pay taxes, you have to deal with issuance as an expense from the protocol level. End users, they don't really know what they could get. If the asset's down 10%, you get 6%, you're actually losing, then you have taxes, etc. Third and final thing is that, we have a set of distributed 100, 200 validators with variable, amounts of stake in each, but the same fixed costs. What's the difference between having, a lot of these chains have no slashing, right? It's just kind of like been something that needs to be implemented. Is it better just to have a set of validators that are effectively almost like a security council per se, trusted amongst the best of the best, and use a process of removing these validators rather than having to slash. Now, I do this recap and the summary for a second time for the reason, because I want to push back on something that, or at least I want to provide a chance for you to respond to what Ryan Sean Adams said when he screenshotted a news post and said, it's of you explaining this proposal. And what he says is that if you do this to your L1 network, you're no longer in the non-sovereign store value game. And if you do this to your network, you probably never were, right? And then he goes on to say that the only two are Bitcoin and ETH. Does proof of governance restrict assets from having this kind of like monetary premium? Is that even a real thing? Does that matter? What would you respond to this take?
Sure. Well, I mean, so you could argue monetary premium is a meme, just like economic security was a meme. It's unclear to me that Ethereum and Bitcoin. Well, it's unclear to me that Ethereum exceptionalism isn't anything beyond a meme. Bitcoin exceptionalism definitely is. it's a meme, but in the good way, not a meme in the bad way, in the sense that Bitcoin exceptionalism has proven Bitcoin has proven time and again that it is exceptional and it does a monetary premium despite not having good properties, or properties that we would consider good. Ethereum, doesn't really have anything exceptional going for it beyond. Well, it doesn't really have anything exceptional going for it. With respect to, if you can do this or you can't do this, ultimately it's up to the community to decide. One thing that people have a hard time mental modeling around is they may see this and say, hey, this is just a consortium chain from back in the day. It's an enterprise consortium chain. How that's any different? The difference between this and consortium chains is the same difference between Ethereum and consortium chains. It's around the social consensus of what is the chain. Like, what is the given you have a chain and a hard fork of the chain with different rules. Which one is the valid one? That's that's ultimately what social consensus decides. You can have various processes automating. You can argue that one is more automated than the other. These are all fine things to argue, and we can argue about them technically. But these are the differences in automation are differences on a spectrum. They're not binary. There's not one thing is one thing and one thing is another thing. There's slight differences by degrees. Now, you can say, well, how is Ethereum store of value when they did the DAO hard fork? Right? Ethereum just goes and tells everyone to stop trading. Now you can say, oh, that was a long time ago. Sure, well, the Bitcoiners don't think it's that long ago, right? There's various criticisms that can be made, but ultimately, the difference between an enterprise chain and a consortium chain and something like a proof of governance or Ethereum today even is around the social consensus deciding which hard fork is valid. Because as long as you can hard fork, imagine you have a consortium chain. It has, 5, 7 validators. The social expectation around the consortium chain and all the centralized exchanges that will accept deposits from this consortium chain. All of these, and the social expectation is the 7 validators run the consortium chain, and they're the only ones running the consortium chain. Maybe the code is closed source, et cetera, et cetera. But if the code is open source and the social consensus of the community is whatever's in the node, whatever's in that software, and whatever validators are decided by the governance, again, the decentralized governance deciding on the validators, that's who the validators are, and that's the blockchain. You can't have someone centralized show up and just say, I control the chain. Right? Like 𝘗𝘓𝑡ia Foundation could show up and say, here are the validators. Then 99% of the validators are just the 𝘗𝘓𝑡ia Foundation and the 𝘗𝘓𝑡ia Foundation with a mustache. Right? And the 𝘗𝘓𝑡ia Foundation with like the glasses and the mustache. Right? And then the community would say no. The ability of the community to say that, and more importantly, the social expectation and consensus that the community can and should do this, that's the differentiator between a consortium chain and a permissionless chain with proof of governance. So proof of governance does not imply permission that it's permissioned, and it does not imply that it's a consortium chain. It's still permissionless, it's still decentralized, it still has all the nice properties of blockchains, because all those properties are downstream of social consensus and not they're downstream of social consensus. And social consensus is kind of what defines the blockchain to be what it is. And that exists whether your consensus protocol is Tendermint or whatever the heck 𝑒TH2 uses. I forget what name they ended up going with. And it doesn't matter if your symbol resistance mechanism is proof of work or proof of stake or proof of governance. None of those things matter because all of those are downstream of the social consensus.
So, John, if I'm understanding this correctly, the acceptance of new validators into the consensus mechanism would be determined by token holders, stakeholders that would vote on accepting these new validators into the system. And each time that happens, there's a hard fork. And effectively, there's kind of the social consensus that decides, okay, we're going to accept the new validator into the system and continue the chain on with this validator included in the selection process to build a new block. Every time, there's a theory that says every time there's a new hard fork, it splinters the community. That's the same reason Bitcoin Cash still has $10 billion of market cap and Ethereum Classic still has $3 billion of market cap. There's kind of the splinter of the Bitcoin community and the splinter of the Ethereum community that whether even if it's just a market maker on some centralized exchange somewhere, that value is continuing on that chain and not on the consensus chain. And so would you agree that each time one of these hard forks happens, and it sounds like there's a lot greater velocity of hard forks, a lot more hard forks that happen in a short amount of time, it splinters the community and therefore loses some of the value here of the chain and the value, even if it's just denominated in market cap? Is there a risk to having too many hard forks, or do you think this could actually bolster the social consensus and kind of rally the community on a more frequent basis, and we're not thinking about hard forks the right way?
Yeah, so first of all, to address your first point around the specifics of the governance process, I don't think I discussed anything around the specifics, although I did give an example of one where you could just hard code it in the node software. The specifics, we're working on some proposals internally. Other people can propose things externally, but there's various ways in which you can execute this governance with various with participation from various parties, including token holders. So just because I say it's governance doesn't mean the token holders get no say whatsoever. Not necessarily they have no decision-making power, but that they have no say. No, that's of course wrong. Of course they can have a say. Of course, the votes of token holders can be surfaced. It just the mechanism which is done is not staking, it's governance. So that's the first point to clarify. Now onto the hard fork point. I guess we'll find out. Ethereum has done a bunch of hard forks throughout the years. Like there was the contentious hard fork around the DAO, and that splintered the community. But Ethereum has had many non-contentious hard forks, and those basically did nothing with respect to splintering, and they did a lot to bolster Ethereum as being the success that it is today. Because the Ethereum Classic chain that refused to hard fork, I guess, the Ethereum chain that does hard fork continuously to improve itself. One of these is worth whatever X billion of dollars. The other one is worth whatever Y million of dollars. So one approach is is better than the other, but it really, I don't think hard forks necessarily splinter things unless there's contention. But if there's contention, there would be contention anyways.
And the way in which that contention is resolved now is basically like one of those camps loses, and it's effectively like the way that we elect a political president. It's like just kind of half the country is unhappy for the next 4 years, and in the proposal of DAO, or it effectively feels like DAO governance, but it has a lot more significance on the outcome of the chain. In proof of governance, it's not just the case that kind of this camp is unhappy. They can continue in the case that they would like to, or they can kind of just defect, right, and join the winning fork that takes place. But I guess what you're saying is you don't expect too many of these contentious hard forks to occur. It's really just a matter of accepting new validators into the system, and paying those validators more cost plus model, rather than coming up with an arbitrary value in which we're going to inflate the supply and pass those on to validators.
Yeah, because currently it's this awkward situation where validators that are, and this kind of I touched on this earlier, is that validators that are on the top of the validator set are potentially highly profitable, and those in the bottom are less so. So it becomes this game where validators want to be in that very highly profitable top part of the set, but then the protocol has to figure out how to pay everyone to make sure people aren't too underpaid. But then you're overpaying the top percentage, et cetera, et cetera. It gets complicated to model, but also it can result in overpayment to validators because those at the top are overpaid. So it becomes this thing where validators try to get paid a lot in the current model, and that's not necessarily what you want. It would be nicer to have a model where validators are paid to be cucks to run run validator software that produces blocks, and they get paid by the protocol, their costs plus some profit, not 100x profit, some respectable profit, so that people will do it. But because of this change in how validators can be compensated and will be compensated, they'll make a profit. Don't get me wrong, but it means they won't have to search for the 100. They won't have to hunt and play games and stuff for the 100x profit. What that means is also that there won't necessarily be huge competition to run a validator, and therefore I don't expect a million people wanting to run a validator. The people who want to run validators may have some secondary services that they can provide along with running a validator node, they can amortize cost on and stuff like that, right? Maybe they run a rollup as a service, and they also run a validator on the side, things like that. So because of that, I don't expect a large churn in the validator set, and therefore there's not really any reason to change it. People who aren't validators aren't losing much because the validators just make a small profit, right? Obviously, if you pay validators 100x profit, it's kind of unfair to gatekeep who is a validator. If the validator just does their thing, they're honest validators, they make a small profit, small but respectable profit. Sure, I guess it's nice to be a validator, but at the same time, you could just not be a validator and put your money into DeFi and make potentially more yield if you want to take some risks, right? So the how validators will be compensated will be more optimized, and therefore you won't have people playing political games to try and be a validator. Like the process will be much more mechanical. It'll be much more, okay, I'm a validator, I just run my software and that's it, I get paid some profit, and therefore anyone can.
Yeah, it is a political game today. I mean, yeah, Rob.
I've just got one more follow-up. And you mentioned that optimizing the value equation to pay validators is going to bring the cost that it to them way down, or excuse me, to the protocol way down, right? And you mentioned that opens up a variety of use cases that you can do. You can, for instance, burn all of the transaction fees. That's an amazing value accrual thesis for a gas token. You could also lower the rate of inflation potentially all the way down to zero. This is kind of where my question is. I guess my question is who, even if it's, the cost of the protocol, right? Protocol kind of in quotations here, is much lower because you've optimized the value equation. Who is the one that pays whatever cost that there still is to validators? If it's not coming from transaction fees, is it coming from still inflating the supply, albeit much less? Or is it really just like a servicing agreement with these validators in which could be paid in fiat or stables or from venture funding, really just as a software as a service, doesn't necessarily even have to be tokens?
Yeah, so the way that's most intrinsically incentivized is the protocol issues a small amount of new tokens just for the validators. So this wouldn't be given to stakers because there's no stakers. It would just be given to the validators, but it could be a very small amount of tokens. We've also been thinking internally, again, by we I mostly mean Nashku, since he's the one driving this, around how you could do things like pay them in stable coins, because they have their costs in stable coins, and it's awkward when they get paid costs in some fluctuating token, which may go up or down. So it could end up the protocol overpays or underpays them, neither of which scenarios are good. If they're paid in a stable coin, then they know exactly what they're going to be paid, which is potentially very nice. And it's also nicer from the protocol perspective. This requires, knowing the exchange price potentially, because you can't issue new stable coins. You can't issue US dollars, for example, but you can issue, if it's, it's Celestia protocol, it can issue TIA. So you need to know the exchange rate, blah, blah, blah. So there's some things to be done, but regardless, you can, the issuance wouldn't be dropped to 0, it would be dropped substantially. Like we're talking 20, potentially 40x.
Yeah, I think I saw it was like 20, like a fourth of 1% annually or something like that.
Yeah.
Last thing for you. Yeah.
And then at such prices, the value accrual thesis of the token becomes very compelling and very interesting, because it goes from having to burn fees that beat the issuance and then more, to, if you want the token to be deflationary and have effectively net buybacks of the token, now you only need to burn a quarter of a percent or less, and suddenly that is much more in the much more feasible range. Like I think someone did some math internally, and we're looking at numbers like, if you get $10,000 or $20,000 in fees a day, which is substantially less than protocols like Hyperliquid, like $10,000 of fees a day, if there's large DA demand and stuff like that, is quite easily achievable. You get that, and suddenly TIA is deflationary. So the value accrual thesis of these tokens that will adopt proof of governance becomes much more obvious, because burning transaction fees, etc. There's no indirection. It's just, okay, here's how the thesis becomes obvious, and then the actual amount also becomes better, because you don't have to surpass inflation and issuance in terms of the fees burnt. And again, the issuance is, okay, you set some high number and then you pay half of it in taxes. Well, what's the point?
Taxes, man. Don't get us started on that.
I think this is the crux of the proposal, right? It's still, and I think, it's a very thoughtful proposal with a lot of detail, but it is almost somewhat revolutionary in the way that we're thinking about proof of stake and now thinking that there is something better out there, and it's so different, but yet you still have this somewhat of the same inputs and outputs. You still have some inflation, and you still have some tokens that are burned, and you get these validators that are providing a service. The only difference is that rather than overpaying all of the top validators and underpaying all of the lower validators, you're now optimizing the value equation so that the tokens that you burn are effectively, those would be passed to the validators if it was like, Bitcoin after the block reward is reached, right? Validator or miners in that case would get these transaction fees. But if that was the case, then in the current setup, they would be massively overpaying the top miners and underpaying the bottom ones. And this sort of balances the scales so that we're still using the value that is flowing through the system to pay for the upkeep of the system. We're just balancing that equation quite a bit more by unbundling the validators with the activity going through the system.
Yeah, and for what is, we didn't really touch on this part, but in terms of the security of the system can actually be very secure against corruption, potentially even more so than proof of stake and proof of work systems, right? Proof of work is a bit interesting. People can just take their hashers elsewhere. Can't really do that to the same extent in proof of stake in some scenarios, but regardless, the point being, in proof of work and proof of stake, you can corrupt a small number of operators, and then because of the principal agent problem, you just corrupt the operators. You don't have to buy stake to overcome the amount staked. Like a lot of people in the model security, they say, oh, you have to buy a bunch of tokens. It's like, no, you don't. You just go to, like, if you're the government, you go up to Lido and say, hey, Lido, I want you to start forking Ethereum. Right? And Lido company will do that, whether they like it or not, because the alternative is to go to prison. Right? Now, there's not to say Lido is bad. Far from it, actually. They seem to be quite good actors, right? But the reality is that you just go and corrupt operators. With proof of governance, you can get you can have a thing where part of the governance process around deciding who is the validator or not is not just looking at a blind list of validators and saying, oh, I'm going to choose the top one because the top one gives me has the lowest commission because they have economies of scale, right? Or like if you're a mining pool, it's not just I'm going to choose the top mining pool because they have the lowest commission, again because of economies of scale. Right? There's no commission to be there's no staking, therefore there's no commission on the proof of governance validator selection. So you can have things like geo distribution, hosted versus bare metal distribution, platform distribution. Maybe some people use Linux, some people use Mac to reduce platform dependency risk. Things like that that allow you to have a large number of validators that are geographically distributed in different jurisdictions, and then to corrupt the proof of stake protocol, you would need 1/3 or 2/3 of the validator set, which in the case of Celestia is 100 validators. So to corrupt 1/3 of them is 33. This would give you an Nakamoto coefficient of 33, while Ethereum's Nakamoto consensus coefficient for 1/3 of the voting power is like 2. Right? So now you end up in a situation where you have to corrupt a substantially larger number of entities that are geographically distributed, and you can choose them such that there aren't 33 validators in any one jurisdiction. So you have to do things like cross-jurisdictional collaboration if you want to corrupt them. So it can actually be very secure, potentially under certain attack scenarios, more secure than any other proof of work or proof of stake protocol that exists today. That's not to say that they're more secure under all scenarios, but under certain scenarios, especially the ones that people are talking about with respect to government overreach or government reach, depending on your positioning and governments, and World War III style scenarios, this geographic distribution and this Nakamoto coefficient actually becomes very important, and that's where proof of governance really excels
John,
at.
thank you for your time and for your work in the space. I appreciate the in-depth explanations and thoughts, as well as the spicy takes. You'll see some of those on your timeline later. I appreciate.
God, I hope not.
Validators or cocks is definitely a bold one. I think we may see some chatter about that. Thanks, John, for giving us a laugh and also sharing a lot of this really, really great info.
Awesome.
man.
Thanks for having me.
Speak to you soon. Alrighty, guys. That was that actually, Rob, that actually took me back to the kind of like, not like old days of the roll up per se, but just it's nice to have a technical conversation. I was actually thinking about that because you've been gone for the last couple streams. And, I just been having like fun and just like shooting the shit and just like ripping it. But I think like there still is demand for those like really solid, smart people coming in, bringing their technical conversations, pushing back. So as much as I think we trend towards this institutional route, not like institutional, but towards this kind of like intersection of traditional finance and DeFi and like this kind of realm and trying to enter that world. I think we ought to sprinkle in more still some of these technical smart conversations as we grow. Obviously we'll have the far other end of the spectrum as well, the degen stuff. But yeah, I enjoy learning in those types of things.
I do too, man. Like I think that's why we got into this, and we continue to learn, and I think that ultimately gives us a lot of edge in our work in the fund, helping projects. I think as long as we will continue to learn, I think it'll continue to provide us a reflexive benefit, the deeper that we get into the space. And so I think you're absolutely right. And I think, there wasn't a lot, and it's somewhat dependent on market conditions. Like the more, the sillier that we get, as we get deeper and deeper into a bull run, we may end up having, less of those technical conversations. But I think it is evident that there are teams out there that always continue to push the needle. They continue to build, whether it's bear or bull. And I really do enjoy having those conversations as well. I think we've got our third and final guest of the stream coming on very, very shortly.
Yeah, we got JJ in the background. Let's get him up to the stream. We're gonna unveil Breeze. It's already kind of been unveiled. We're gonna learn about it. We're gonna talk to JJ. JJ, good to see you, man. Still recovering from Cannes. That bet was ridiculous. I can't believe that I took those odds. So for those of you who don't know, we were in Cannes. JJ was there. We were all hanging out, and all the flights were getting delayed. And so what I did was I actually bet JJ that he wouldn't get out of Cannes before like Friday or something, because I think you were trying to go home for 4th of July, right?
Yeah, correct. I was.
Yeah, and so his flight did make it, and I took 1 soul to 4 soul odds, which was terrible. I had like 3 drinks. I thought it was a good idea. And
it's a bull market. Of course, his flight got out. It's a bull market. They're not going to ground his flight in a bull market. We got, these guys in the Nice airport that are striking have fart coin bags. Of course, they're showing up to work. Nah,
apparently.
No way.
So JJ made it out. Anyways, that's the backstory. JJ, good to have you on, man. How are you?
Thanks for having me, guys. It's awesome to be here. I did the opposite of hedge, I guess. Just doubled down. If that flight didn't take off, I would have missed the 4th of July and I would have been down some cash. So in the bull market, it pays to double down, as a lot of the great crypto legends have said in the past. Maybe just use a little bit less leverage than Suzu and the 3AC guys.
Man, so the topic of the day is Breeze, which I'd love to get into. I just want to get your take on these DATs, these digital asset treasuries. Like, obviously, you're kind of in the weeds with Anagram. You see a lot of different deal flow, different things happening. Like, what's your take on this kind of speculative mania that's unfolding? I put out a tweet. I was like, I think there's going to be DATs for the top 25 tokens. People were like, bro, this is undershooting. There's going to be for the top 100. What's your take on this? Are you participating in any of these, either on the venture side or in the public markets? What's your thoughts here?
Man, we could have like a whole separate 1.5 hour long conversation just around the market structure and like how these things have evolved over time. I would say you're undershooting. I think there will be, DATs for maybe every crypto token or multiple for the majors at least. And then you'll just see, people continue to go to the money well until it dries up. Again, this is just, financial engineering, more or less. Like, people are taking advantage of the arbitrage trade, which would be like the premium to NAV. So MicroStrategy, they're the biggest in the market, but you're interestingly enough seeing a lot of these other crypto treasury companies receive some kind of premium to NAV. Is it a long-term play? It's very difficult to say. But for now, I think like when I first discovered DATs was back when Sol Strategies launched. And I'm not talking about the context of like MicroStrategy. I'm talking about like the altcoin specific DATs that we're seeing more of now. At that point, I was like, okay, this is the first inning. About a month and a half later, there was multiple DATs that had come to market. You know, we saw things like 𝘱𝘱𝘃 or DeFi Dev Corp on the Solana side. I think at that point, there was the beginning of some of these ETH DATs as well. And then you were like, okay, is this the 8th inning? Is this the 9th inning? Now I don't even know what inning we're in, but I know that a lot of people are kind of playing this ball game. In terms of participation, we really have looked at all of these. We have great relationships with the bankers that are printing these deals. If you think about Anagram, we have a very flexible mandate, given we're like a crypto native holding company. So, you know, we're looking at all these. The only one that we have invested in, and I just want to disclose that this is not financial advice by any way, shape, or form. We invested in 𝘱𝘱𝘃, and we work very closely with that team. I think that DATs are kind of interesting from a number of different perspectives. I think the piling of an asset that is already issued or has existed for a while is less interesting than what we'll probably see in the second, third chapter. Like the Athena one was quite interesting. It's like, okay, now you have an alt token that is live, that now has a public market vehicle for institutional investors to get access to. But also it brings external buy pressure that wouldn't exist on chain for an asset like Athena. So it brings that kind of like educational aspect to the public markets, and also brings buy pressure to a great asset. I think we'll see more of those. And then, you know, maybe I'm overshooting my skis here, but I do think we'll see pre-TGE DATs. I think we'll see companies that go to launch a token, the foundation will sell a portion of their assets into a treasury company, and you'll have kind of like an IPO times crypto, you know, ICO event at the same time, right? So I could see that being in the cards for, you know, newer, larger ecosystems, maybe like a Mega ETH, maybe like a Monad. Again, none of this is confirmed, just speculating here, but that's my read. That's what I think the next chapter is.
You get a money rain for that one, brother. That's a ballsy prediction. Thank you for that. I hadn't even thought about that even being possible. Interesting. You know, I think a lot of these funds are actually doing this with locked tokens and getting, you know, much quicker liquidity, which I think is an interesting added benefit for funds.
Yeah, 100%. And the tax benefit, right? So like, for example, if I have, let's say I'm a Solana investor, I hold Solana. When I sell that Solana, I have to take I have capital gains, right? So I have to pay those taxes. If I invest my Solana in kind, which basically means I'm rolling my Solana into this treasury company in exchange for shares in that business, I now defer the tax hit, and I'm not like taking that same tax hit. And I'm also basically getting like a leverage bet on that Sol bag or on that underlying token bag, which is what makes it sexy for large holders of some of these assets.
Yep. All right, JJ, let's talk Breeze, man. It's kind of under stealth. You're spinning out of Anagram to build this. The Twitter says something around Solana yield. I honestly, you know, Rob and I have no idea what it is. Maybe start with the problem. What is the problem that you're looking to solve?
There's two fundamental bets that are underlying Breeze. The first one is that in the past, most crypto users onboarded via centralized exchanges. The bet there is that in the future, most new crypto users will onboard via fintechs, mobile apps, terminals, applications, right? So more people are going to come in through the application layer because there's real fundamental use cases for crypto, and you'll see it start to be adopted by large fintechs and mobile, you know, payments apps and all of that. So that's bet number one, is like apps will eat the world in crypto, and now crypto is usable to the point where like, okay, this seems like a real thing, and all of these big players are coming on chain. The second is yield is going to become table stakes. If you think about like crypto superpowers, I think about permissionless, you know, kind of like crowdfunding or like the accumulation of capital. I think about, you know, kind of the fact that there's the lowest possible barrier entry for development and launch. And then I think about like yield, or like what interesting properties do these assets have on their own. So the bet is basically apps, yield. Every single app in the future that holds capital will not have idle balances. It will have either crypto assets or some kind of real world asset that is earning yield over time. And that's the bet with Breeze. We are building the infrastructure or the plumbing to pipe yield into every single mobile app. So you can think about your Axioms, your Moonshots, you know, your Reaps, your CAS, every payment, you know, every payment protocol. We want to be the thing that powers their yield flow, and that's what we built with Breeze.
Oh, investor calling.
Can I get in the seed round, please? Okay, so there's been pitched to me there's going to be a world in the future where like, and it's already happening with tokenized stocks, where rather than, and one big reason why tokenized stocks and tokenized equities are happening amongst kind of just fintech adoption is that there's this race to be the app where you don't have to have a Schwab account, a Binance account, a hardware wallet, and like all these other things. You can just have a very unified account with like all of your assets, you know, stocks, bonds, commodities, crypto, etc., all in one. Now, you know, maybe that's relevant to the way you're thinking about this or not, but just like, you know, how are you thinking about actually deriving this yield? Who is going to be the, you know, users of this yield? Like, how are you thinking about actually getting people access to this yield? What is the protocol going to enable for people?
100%. Great question. So we integrate at the app layer. So any app that is like, hey, we want yield functionality, drop one block of code. What we do on the back end is we're basically aggregating across all of the major yield sources on Solana. So think your Caminos, your Drifts, your Margin Fies, you know, soon your Juplens. We're going to be picking up all of that yield. Now your users, if you're that application and you integrate Breeze, they click one button, all of their idle balances are earning yield, but you're not foregoing liquidity, right? So they're instantly liquid. So you can still trade those assets as they're earning yield. So it's different than staking where you have like this 2-day withdrawal queue. And that's kind of the game plan. So I see the world like very similar to you guys. It's like there's a rush for all of these apps to bundle in all of this functionality. We never want to build an app. I would suck at building an app. I don't know if I can, you know, run the B2C type of business. What we want to do is build the strongest and most comprehensive infrastructure for getting yield into every single app that exists and kind of owning that, you know, owning that specific vertical.
And JJ, what was the rationale behind choosing Solana as the primary yield source?
The app layer, man. I mean, if you look at, you know, who really owns the app layer today, it's Solana. You've had breakout Telegram bots, you know, terminals, apps like Moonshot, you know, Pump even has the mobile app now. You have the proliferation of the app layer on Solana. And I think people resonate with it because it's like cheap and you have something to speculate on, right? Like the meme coin ecosystem is super vibrant. So that was the reasoning for kind of going all in on Solana. Will we go to other chains in the future? Yeah, potentially. Like I definitely think that's in the cards, but for now, just focused on scaling on the Solana ecosystem.
Yeah. So like, let's take Moonshot as an example. I'm still trying to understand how that's going to work. So Moonshot has all these different tradable tokens, right? That you can trade on Moonshot. You're saying that like what you're going to do behind the scenes is allow for like, you know, let's say you have, you know, let's just use Sol as an example, or like, you know, JLP, right? You're going to be able to integrate like the actual yield from on chain behind the scenes and so that the user will just use an app like Moonshot, but when they hold an asset on Moonshot, for example, they will be earning yield on that asset. Or like, how much will the user know, and like, how will that process go from like, you know, Breeze is providing this service to like an app like Moonshot, or like a you know, something similar, like how is that process going to actually happen?
Yeah, again, another great question. So we have a customizable UI toolkit in terms of like how much the user will know. That is up to the app and the user. What we do is we provide full customizability. We have a UI toolkit. We have a portal for monitoring. The way to think about it is like, I don't know if you guys use a bunch of these trading bots or trading terminals or anything like that, but I do, and I hold a balance on a lot of these different apps. Now, while I'm holding that balance, it just it just sits stagnant, right? Like it's literally just sitting there. What we do is take all of those idle assets, they earn yield, and then when a user trades them, right, what the user's actually doing is saying like, hey, I want to swap my Solana for Fartcoin, right? I want to make that meme coin bet. And we don't want to prevent users from doing that. So they go to swap it. What we do is route their assets right back to the user from that yield pool that they're sitting in. And then the user is able to complete that all in one transaction. So they can go from yield earning Solana into Fartcoin within the one transaction with no additional latency. So we're just trying to meet users where they're at, make yields, as seamless as possible, and basically make it a no-brainer. It's like, why wouldn't you want to earn yield if there's no trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, we just had this conversation actually around the idea of like staking and just like how LSTs have become a very commonplace and logical next step to staking it as a consensus protocol, and it's just kind of like, of course, users are going to want to get LSTs, go into DeFi, loop, get other yield opportunities, etc. Similar kind of framing here, but different reference. If you can have minimal smart contract risk and get yield, then of course, everyone's going to want to do it. And your bet basically is that investors are going to want yield as a commonplace baseline for whatever they're holding, like pretty much regardless going forward in the future, as a result of like, I don't know, like what is there any sort of like what is the what is the your like reasoning behind users definitely want yield, other than just like everybody wants more money? Like, is this a trend that you like have studied that has shifted as a result of like crypto, or as a result of like interest rates going up? Like, why do you believe so strongly that over the next like half a decade or so, yield in every asset, so to say, is going to be like baseline?
Yeah, I think it's like a fundamental paradigm shift. I mean, the way that I think about it is like, I'm sure we all have like mobile banking apps. It's like you don't keep that much money in your checking account or your savings account because it's just sitting there, right? Like you put that money to work in crypto, or you put that money to work in the stock market. Now, when all the assets, like all the assets in the world, I think will be ported on chain, all of a sudden, maybe you have a new risk-free rate or a new hurdle rate, and that is like the yield rate, and you're looking to outperform that. Because I believe that like fundamentally, I would rather hold any assets, right, whether it be my paycheck or my crypto, in something that is compounding and growing over time, right? If I want to be long an asset, why wouldn't I be long an asset by holding spot plus accruing the value of earning yield? Otherwise, I'm just getting inflated out over time. And it's, you can make the same case for the US dollar. It's like, why would I hold the US dollar over a 10-year period when I can hold an asset like Solana and earn 8% annually on that? It's like, think about comparing that to like the benchmark USD over like 10 years, right? So for us, it's not just about SOL or like alt assets that we can earn yield on. It's also about RWAs and stables, right? So we can connect any amount of yield sources on the back end. So right now it's Camino Drift, MarginFi, and soon to be Jupe. In the future, it might be curated vaults with Gauntlet. It might be, some kind of BlackRock RWA, type of pool, right? We're literally just here to provide the infrastructure and the customizability to bring yield to whoever that counterparty is at the end. You can imagine Moonshot might have a way different user base than a Revolut, which might have a way different user base than, I don't know, like a Western Union or like a remittances business. We're putting the power in those developers' hands to say, Moonshot might say, we want 9% APY for our platform. We can deliver that. Whereas Revolut might say, we want 5% and just in USDC, and we can deliver that as well. So that's kind of the plan with Breeze. It's like yield is fundamentally better. If you can offer it in a seamless way, then, we think it's a no-brainer that users will opt in.
Beauty. Last thing for you, JJ, what's the timeline? Where are you guys at? Are you guys testing mainnet launch? What's the process here to get live?
We just went live 30 minutes ago, man. I dropped a tweet and then I hopped on this. Yeah, the contracts have been live for over a month. We're fully audited. We've tested the hell out of those contracts. We're working with our initial partners, right? So we're partnered with Turnkey, with the idea there being, you have a partnership with Turnkey, we get baked into all the apps that Turnkey is able to power, and like integrating yield at that key management layer. And then, as I mentioned, Camino, Drift, Margin, Fi as yield sources initially, and plans to rapidly iterate and expand and have conversations with, any apps that are looking for yield functionality.
Dude, you get the money rain, the confetti burst. Congratulations, JJ. Thanks for spending some time with us today. And I'm looking forward to your shift from a investor thinking and philosophy to builder philosophy and builder thinking. It's a different game. So I know you'll have some challenges and some obstacles and things, but I think you're ready for it, man. So let's go.
I'm excited, man. Thanks for having me, guys. And, after, building this over the last 10 months, it's definitely a whole different game. It gives me a newfound appreciation for going founder mode. So yeah, it's fucking hard, but it's the most exciting thing, in my mind to do right now. So I'm super excited to keep pursuing this mission, and thanks for having me.
Congrats on launch, man.
It's awesome, man.
More money for you. Have a good day. I'm going to go grab some dinner, maybe a little beer. It's 9 p.m. here in Copenhagen. The boys are buzzing.
Oh, enjoy, dude. Beautiful city.
Yeah, man. All right, buddy. See you soon.
Take care.
Thanks, JJ.
Bye.
See ya.
All righty, Rob. That'll do it, man. That
will do it.
That's we're getting ready to rip these things live. And daily. Our producer got us confetti and money. We're gonna get sound effects next, and we're gonna get some visual animations next. I need a laughing, like a ha 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 one with like the laughing emoji coming on the screen, and probably need like when somebody says something spicy, like a fiery like emoji on the screen.
Like a chili pepper.
Or like if one of us says something stupid, like a splat, like you're on timeout type of thing. Like,
oh yeah.
So
we can tell you're definitely going in the institutional RWA focus. We're gonna see how silly we get on these streams.
BTC back to 120.
Yeah, we gotta end this before you check the Pengu chart.
Pengu's at 44. We're gonna return the fund on Pengu. I already tweeted it. The boys are buzzing. Let's go. Rob's back. We'll see you guys Thursday. Thanks, guys.